So there's obviously a lot to unpack still. So you have the coordinator situation, you have the transfers, you have leaks, you have accusations from former players. So what is Bryan Harsin's personality like? You've covered coaches, head coaches, assistant coaches. So when you say things like didn't see eye to eye with Derek Mason, when you say things like Austin Davis is there for 40 days and then leaves rumoredly because of whatever it is, recruiting, or doesn't understand the grind, is it because Bryan Harsin is evil? Is he a hard ass? Is he weird? Is he not a people person? Does he make promises to coaches or players that don't come to fruition? Like, what is it that has him not seeing to eye, I guess, part A, with coaches, as he's going through a lot of major ones, and B, with players, understanding that obviously every relationship is different. But is there like a common thread that, like, here is the picture that is being painted of Bryan Harsin, the human?
Yeah, I think the best way to explain Bryan Harsin and describe him is that he's a tough dude, but he's also very much like, some people have called him stubborn. I think it's just he is very one track. Like, he has his ideas that he wants to do, and it's a big change and a big difference. You think about the players. Gus Malzahn, personality-wise, and Bryan Harsin, very, very different folks. And I think part of that culture change got to this point where it's like, okay, this is a completely different way of doing things. He is tougher. There are players, ex-players, current players have said it is a completely different kind of regime there. And not an abusive kind of thing, right. But more of just like this was not what a lot of dudes signed up for. And some guys click with that. Some guys identify with that whole kind of sole focus, everybody on board with the same thing. And then yet there are some others that are like, okay, well, this is not really working, or this doesn't really fit with me. And guys, like, obviously know this. It's a lot harder to convince people to go to the my way or the highway route when you go 6 and 7. Right. It's a little different when you have like a Nick Saban kind of success, or some other kind of, I would say disciplinarian is probably the best way to put it, kind of coaches. And so, it's been tough. And like, Auburn, Bryan Harsin, we talk about coaching turnover. He fired his wide receivers coach 4 games into the season. He fired Mike Bobo, the offensive coordinator, after the regular season, before the bowl game. Very demanding, and it seems like he's got a quick trigger on things when things aren't going the way he wants them to go. So I think there was a lot of that, and it didn't click with certain players. And I think there's also just some of it where there's a good group of those guys that left Auburn and were like, okay, we're not going to be starters. It's the portal era. It's a whole lot easier to make that jump. But you had quite a few former players kind of stand out and say, yeah, I mean, it was just tough. It was tough to, identify with him, get along with him. And I think it's a big culture change, because coaching in the SEC and coaching in Auburn, Alabama is a whole lot different than coaching in Boise, Idaho. And that's been most of Bryan Harsin's football life, outside of basically like 3 or 4 years of his coaching and his football life have been spent at his alma mater. It's a big change down here.
Do you think the vetting process of Bryan Harsin is now fraught with regret from those who vetted him? Because look, the complaints from the players are understandable, because they were recruited by a different head coach, a different regime, as you mentioned, and just sometimes it's just not a fit. That seems to be pretty commonplace in the sport right now. But the way he came in and immediately seemed to be just a different guy, just in the way he interacted with people. Do you think that was something that, and I don't know if there was a search firm used, or it was, boosters, whether it was the athletic director, whatever, like, did it catch them by surprise, like the way his first year went, both on the field, in the facilities, and on the recruiting trail? Was that a surprise? Because my assumption is, at a place as large and with the expectations on the level that Auburn people have, that every stone would be unturned, and he would have to provide binders and binders of like a detailed vision of how his program is going to be run. Has 2021 been a surprise to those people?
I think there were a lot of people around Auburn, or in the power circles, I should say, that saw the appeal of getting a guy like Bryan Harsin because he was different. preaching like the hard work, the tough-minded mentality. Not saying that you didn't have that under Gus Malzahn and some other coaches in the past, but it was just very different. I remember when he got hired, a lot of people said, for a guy who has never coached in the NFL, he kind of has that NFL kind of mindset, all business, ready to go. Right. And Auburn has not had a coach like that in a very long time, maybe if ever. It's just this place has had a lot more of the Southern coaches, the folksier coaches, kind of more people person types. So I think a lot of people thought personality-wise, okay, this guy is what we thought we were getting when he signed up, basically. I think some of it, and if there is a regret, it's just that, okay, the adaptability and bringing him into the SEC recruiting landscape, and it's just there's been a lot of talk, and there's been a lot of reports and stories of people saying, I don't know if Auburn necessarily under Bryan Harsin, quote unquote, gets it in terms of building that recruiting operation that's got to compete with Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M, LSU, and all these places. And when you have a season like you do, and you don't really have a recruiting class or a transfer portal thing to sell people on, what you're basically doing at that point is saying, hey, trust the process. Basically, we're going to work hard and we're going to get it. And Auburn fans, and I think some people with power and influence at Auburn looked at it and said, okay, we understand it's a culture change. We understand he's trying to build something, but like, you got to get the dudes. You got to get the dudes to win in the SEC. And it wasn't a great recruiting class by Auburn standards. And they've only brought in, they've had so many guys leave the portal. They've only brought in 5 guys, and none of them, right now look like dudes that are like clear cut, like day one starters. And that's tough. That's a really, really tough spot to be in. And so that all that kind of gets is like, oh man, was this guy really, who we wanted? Or So I think there's a lot of that the recruiting. I think the recruiting angle is like, I think there's a lot of people who thought that, maybe it would be a little bit more adaptable. They knew it would take time to get going, but that's his big thing moving forward. If you're going to move forward for Bryan Harsin, they've got to adjust and get better at recruiting, because if not, you're dead in the SEC.